Well, thank you all for joining. The purpose of today's virtual training is to provide either a refresher training or an introduction training to Atlas Genomics, which is one of the vendors sponsored by the Learn to Return program. Learn to Return is Washington State's school-based COVID-19 testing program, which is funded by the Washington State Department of Health, advised by OSPI, and implemented in partnership with Health Commons Project and all 9 ESD regions. I'll kick us off and I'll go over some quick housekeeping for the webinar today, but really this time is for Casey Marvin from Atlas Genomics to walk you through all of the resources and support that they can provide your school or school district this school year. Closed captions are available. If you go to the bottom of your little Zoom window, there's a button that says CC. Those should be providing live, fairly accurate closed captions for this event. We'll keep everybody muted except for myself and Casey. Again, go ahead and put questions in the chat and there will be time for Q&A afterwards. Okay, so Atlas Genomics is a Washington-based lab. They have a lab here in Seattle. They offer PCR testing. Last school year, they supported 71 school districts, which represented over 200 school buildings. 9 of those school districts fall in high SVI areas, which are chronically underserved, underfunded areas. We highlight this to show you that Atlas is capable of serving a variety of schools. They are here to meet your unique needs, your unique preferences. Atlas has been standing up to their equity promise, our equity promise with the statewide program. They have translated all of their consent forms into DOH's top 20 languages. Those consent forms are available to you and your school to make sure that your testing program is truly language accessible. They also provide a saliva collection sample for PCR test. They are the only vendor through the Learn to Return program that offers a saliva-based test. And this is a really helpful form of test for folks who may have an aversion to nasal swab, any sort of sensory consideration. It might be easier for some folks to provide that saliva sample rather than going up the nostril, but I'll let Casey talk about that a little bit more. In addition to saliva and nasal, Atlas provides individual testing or pooled testing. So individual testing is where you test the individual. That single swab, single specimen goes into its own tube and is processed at the lab so you can find out the results of that individual. Atlas also offers something called pooled testing, which is an effective and efficient form of screening where you can collect specimens from multiple people, a single swab per person, but all of those swabs are put into a larger tube that's processed by the lab, and you can find out if either that entire cohort of individuals is negative or if there's one positive, it will trigger the test for a follow-up. And again, Casey can talk about that more, but I highlight it to say that Atlas is a strong partner if you are looking to do screening of a lot of individuals at once. They also have that individual PCR capability for diagnostic or individual screening purposes. Okay, Casey, I'll pass it over to you.
Sarah, it's good to see a lot of familiar names out there. So excited to work with many of you again this year and meet some of you that I have not met yet. Don't feel like you need to take copious notes, because if you do decide to use Atlas, we'll do a one-on-one. It's certainly not your only training. There'll be much more. When you do fill out the initial intake form for Atlas, the most important pieces that we need, obviously, is the school name and the address and the number of students and staff, because I need to be able to get you supplies. And then the testing strategy, whether we're going to do pool screening with follow-up individual diagnostic testing, or if we're just going to do individual diagnostic testing. and then also a contact name and anyone else who is going to access what we call TestDirectly. That's where we input orders and print out labels and all that stuff. And then your desired start time. So once we do have that intake form, we'll have a kickoff call and we'll talk about ordering supplies and obviously your strategy. But when you do get low on supplies, it's really simple to order more. All you do is email me or call me and say, Casey, I need more supplies. I kind of keep track of how many tests you're sending in each week or month. So I have an idea on when you're running low, and I'll ping you and say, hey, do you need more supplies? But the best way to do it is just to email me. You can always call me. And if you need supplies immediately, you can always come to our laboratory, which is in Magnolia. It's just down from Fisherman's Terminal. You can always pick up supplies there. Just coordinate with me and I'll have them all ready to go for you. So sample collection. There's a couple different types of tests we do. Individual PCR testing through a nasal swab. We also do the saliva direct testing, and we do pool testing. So pool testing is meant for a larger group. So this is a screening. This is kind of a proactive approach to finding out if you have any positives in your school. If you wanted to test the entire population of your school, you do it through pools. And we do a pool anywhere from 5, the minimum, 5 people per pool, up to 25 per pool. These are 50 mil dry tubes. So it's a larger tube than the individual tubes, and each student assigned to a specific pool swabs their nose. They walk up and they drop the swab side down into that tube. Now you'll see the best practice here: observer uncaps tube, observer places tube in cup, student collects samples and puts it into the cup. That's for pool testing. Individual PCR testing for an observer is a little bit different because we've got some what we call it's VTM, viral transport media, in the bottom of it. So we don't actually place those tubes into a cup. The observer holds onto that tube, uncaps the tubes and holds it while the student then places the swab into the tube itself. And then saliva, you have to make sure that the student or faculty members haven't eaten in 30 minutes or more. They should rinse their mouth out before they do the collection. And then nothing in the mouth, water, nothing else for half an hour before collection. But if you decide to do a saliva test, we'll go over that in more detail. Getting the samples to the lab, it's really quite simple. Anybody along the I-5 corridor and even I-90, we have a courier service that's really great. We can do a regularly scheduled stop, meaning we stop every Monday at 4 o'clock, or we can do what's called an on-demand courier service, where you just email me or call me and say, hey, Casey, we've got some samples that need to come to the lab today. If you're outside of our courier service, we do offer FedEx. Rest assured that Atlas Genomics will supply you with everything you need to get the samples to us. So all you really need to do is just follow my instructions and pack them the way I tell you to, and drop them off at FedEx or have FedEx come pick them up. It's pretty simple. TestDirectly. So this is where we house all of your students and faculty members and sometimes parents' information for creating tests, inputting the order, printing labels, and viewing results. So we do ask that all the schools try their best to collect insurance information for these tests. The parents or caregivers, they can sign into TestDirectly. We'll give you a link that is specific to your school. Once they sign in and create an account, they link their dependents to that account, and then they enter in their insurance information if they have it. If they don't have insurance, then they simply say that they attest to not having insurance, and we move on from there. We can also do all this on site if a student has not, or a student's parent has not registered on TestDirectly for your school. We can still administer a test if they've signed a consent form. So this shows you what it looks like when you first log on to TestDirectly to find a patient. They'll go into patient search, enter the patient's last name. Once you've entered in the last name, you click on refresh and it'll pull up that patient's information. To create an actual order, after you have selected that patient's name, you'll simply right click on that record and select new order. It will pull up that the patient information, and you scroll all the way down to the very bottom. Everything else will be auto-populated for you once they're in the system. And then we find payment source. Now, payment source is where you will enter the information, the insurance information. We either have new insured, new uninsured, or insurance bypass. We'll get into that in a minute. If you do select new insurance, it'll give you a drop down of many different insurance companies. Obviously, you select the one that they're insured with, enter in the corresponding information. For most students, obviously, you're going to have to select child, right? Because it's most likely a parent's insurance that they're under. I will say this really quick. If somebody has already registered themselves online, you will never have to even touch this. They'll own that account. All you have to do is just search the name and boom, everything will auto-populate. It's incredibly simple. But if it is a brand new patient for you, you will have to go through these steps. Patients who do not have insurance or do not wish to provide insurance, they must attest to not having it. If they do not have insurance, it'll give them a drop down like to collect either a state ID, a social security number, or there's another option that says no ID. We're not going to not test people because they don't want to give you their ID. The insurance bypass feature on TestDirectly and for our lab and even for the state is meant for those who may not have enough information in the system, meaning they haven't created a TestDirectly account or they've never been tested before, and you try to get in touch with the parent or guardian and you're just not able to. Most of the time when students come into the nurse's lounge and they're not feeling well and you want to test them, one of the first things you do is you call a parent or guardian, right? If for some reason you can't get a hold of that child's parent or guardian, there is an option, if they've consented to testing, there is an option for doing the test without entering insurance information or without saying no insurance, and it's the insurance bypass. Now, that is meant not to be used all the time. It's meant for if you can't get a hold of anybody to ask about insurance information, you can use this insurance bypass option. If you want to run a report on students or their families, their households who have or have not filled out or registered on TestDirectly, there is a report you can run. And this is it's quite simple. You just select patient search, filter drop down, no complete insurance or uninsured payment, and then you use that refresh button at the bottom right. So if you have a smaller school, 500 students or less, this is a really great tool, especially if you've sent it out to all of your families and asked them to register on TestDirectly. You can figure out which ones have already entered in all their information, and if they haven't, maybe you can send them a reminder. Consent forms. Now, this is very important. We need to make sure that we are collecting consent for every person being tested, not just students. We're talking faculty, we're talking parents, anybody who sends a test into Atlas Genomics needs to have signed a consent form. I will provide you with the consent form. You can post it on your school's website. It's okay if they sign it electronically, or a physical copy is also fine. Verbal consent is not acceptable. They only need to do it once per school year, so it's not that difficult. The lab doesn't actually need a physical copy of the consent form. You can keep that in your files. That's great. But if somebody does reach out to us and says, hey, I want you to prove consent for John Doe, then I'll reach out to the school and I'll say, hey, excuse me, please, will you please send me a copy of John Doe's consent form? reporting and notification of results. So first of all the school administrators will have access to the results. If you do have some folks that you don't want them to be able to see results, but you do want them to input orders or be able to print labels or something like that, we'll talk about that on our kickoff call, and you can tell me what permissions they want. But for the most part, all administrators will be able to view results. Now, when we're inputting an order, if the family has pre-registered with TestDirectly, they'll get a notification in their email or a text message that says, hey, they have a result ready. If they don't register and an email is not provided, it will be then your responsibility to reach out to them, especially if it's positive, and let them know their child's result came back positive. Nothing else is required by you. The lab, we report it to the state. We do everything else. But you as a school, if they didn't give you an email or a cell phone number, you'll have to reach out to that family and let them know.
Great. Thanks, Casey. So Casey is a resource to all of you. You have met him. You have his email. The benefit of Atlas as a small local lab is you are working with Casey directly. You're not going to go to a large customer service team who doesn't know you and doesn't know your local context. So such an asset to have Casey to work with directly. We also have the Learn to Return website, where we have produced toolkits and implementation guides in partnership with Atlas. So these are some of those written guides, tutorials, protocols that you can use as you're onboarding new staff to your testing program or trying to do a refresher. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be in touch via email. Casey will be in touch for those of you who have already been working with Atlas for some of those follow-up consent forms and other materials.
Thank you, everyone.